In the rural sugar cane fields of Fiji, there is one rule everyone knows. Never walk alone at night. And never follow a voice you don't recognize. Because sometimes it's not your family calling you home. Even though Fiji is developing, but in many rural areas, progress toward basic amenities like electricity has been slow. It's not unusual for the bright lights of suburban towns to suddenly give way to vast open countryside, where homes sit miles apart and their small lanterns barely pierce the surrounding darkness. By day, the land is breathtaking, lush green alive. By night, it becomes something else entirely. This story comes from my father's side of the family. The encounter happened when my grandfather was around 14 years old in the mid-1960s. His family lived in one of the deepest rural parts of Fiji, farming the same sugarcane land their ancestors had worked since 1879, when they were brought there under British colonial rule. The land itself carried a heavy history. Colonial control was harsh, and both Indian laborers and local Fijians suffered deeply under it. Many died during those years. Traditional mourning rituals were discouraged and, in some cases, banned by colonial authorities who considered them unnecessary. As a result, many who died were buried hastily in fields, forests, riverbanks, and gorges, or simply cast into the river to drift out to sea. Without proper rites or farewells, the land became a resting place for countless unsettled souls. Even decades later, villagers believed that spirits wandered the roads, riverbanks, and sugarcane fields at night, lost and searching. Because the village stretched across miles of isolated farmland, there were strict rules for traveling after dark. Never walk alone, and never follow anyone who calls out if you don't recognize them. But youth rarely respects rules. My grandfather's two older brothers often ignored those warnings, especially after nights spent drinking and laughing at a distant neighbor's home. One night, around 4 a.m., under a sky heavy with stars, the three brothers began the long walk home through narrow paths cutting between tall sugarcane stalks. They followed the riverbank, which served as a guide through the fields. At one point, the two older brothers stopped to relieve themselves. The youngest brother, wanting privacy, wandered deeper into the cane. When they finished, they decided to play a trick on him for tagging along against their wishes. Quietly, they slipped away and hurried home, leaving him behind. Unaware he had been abandoned, my grandfather returned to the riverbank to wash his hands. Looking up the path, he saw a figure dressed in white moving ahead of him. Relieved, he called out, thinking it was one of his brothers. A voice answered. Believing they were still teasing him, he followed. But no matter how quickly he walked, he couldn't catch up. When he shouted for them to slow down, the voice called back, urging him to hurry, angered and frustrated, especially at the thought of them running dangerously close to the slippery river's edge. He eventually stopped and decided to go home alone. That night, he shared a room with his mother. She later said it was a night she would never forget. Soon after falling asleep, my grandfather began talking, something he had never done before. Then, still asleep, he tried to rise and leave the house. He was heading toward the river. Alarmed, his mother tied a rope around his wrist and secured it to herself to keep him from wandering off. Throughout the night, he repeated the same words over and over. "They're calling me. I must go to them." By morning, my great-grandfather had gathered the boys and forced the truth out of them. He had never looked so angry, they said. A local priest was brought in to bless the house and ward off whatever had followed my uncle home. The elders believed that by answering the call at the riverbank, he had unknowingly invited something into his life, something that intended to take him away. Had his mother not stopped him, they believed he would have walked straight into the river and never returned. The older brothers carried that guilt for years. Their foolish prank had nearly cost their younger brother his life. Even today, when we visit our grandparents' ancestral land, no one is allowed outside after midnight without company. The sugarcane fields still whisper in the wind, and the river still runs through the dark. And some believe the spirits are still walking, searching for someone to follow them home.